Hello there, and welcome to Right Hive 23. Welcome to the Believable Technology in Fiction panel, where we have five great panelists who are going to talk about how you can put technology into your fiction, whether you'd like it to be believable or perhaps not. All right, folks, please introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Alex Smith, science fiction author, currently working on the Wolf and Me trilogy with the Wolf and Me Survive already out and the Wolf and Me Fight coming out this October.
Hi, I'm Claire Winn. I write young adult science fiction and fantasy. My first published series is started with City of Shattered Light in 2021, and it concludes with City of Vicious Night in May 2023. And I'm also a LARPer and gamer and all-around nerd.
I am Joaquin Gil. I do graphic novels, scripts, novels, and, in bad days, I do the silent too. But I try to stay within realms that I can imagine. So I try not to get in trouble in things that I don't know much about. So my realms are mostly science fiction and a little bit of fantasy because why not?
Hi, everyone. I'm Marina. You probably know me by MK Marteens. So this is my third Right Hive. And usually I'm in some sort of a science panel, probably because I have a PhD in molecular biology. I'm also head of an R&D department for a biotech company, which is why I'm here today to talk about R&D.
Hi, I'm Patrick Dugan. I am a science fiction and fantasy author. My newest release is Never Steal from Dragons. Came out last week. Cyberpunk heist set in the world of fairies.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. First of all, let's just go around real quick and give our own definitions of technology so that we can set our expectations for believability.
So technology for me is really anything that we've created to help make our jobs and our lives easier. So cars technology, computers technology, sliced bread technology, because oh my god, does that save so much time. So really just anything that you could think of that we've come up with to solve a problem or make our lives easier in some sort of fashion.
Yeah, that's a good definition. I think as far as writing sci-fi and fantasy, in that context, to me, technology is any of those aspects of the world that are not magical.
Mine encompass, I can say, three sides: the practical application of knowledge, the instruments, call them devices, machinery, whatever, that are result of this knowledge, and the study of this type of activity. So that's like a tripod. And if one of the three is missing, your world falls down. So I would say that's the three crucial points to keep for technology. And they mean something, so it's easy to remember.
I think it's really hard to say something on a topic like that after you talk after three people that already made such a good decisions. But then let me add something from my, the aspect that I'm most familiar with, which is the aspect of biotechnology. And I think in the department of biotechnology, this is something that we're only going to see boom in the future. So I think what we consider biotechnology today is essentially anything, related to or established from a living thing or a living side of the technology. So either whether it stemmed from cells, from DNA, from, actually living organisms or so on. But what the definition of biotechnology in the future will be, I think it's out there. I'm really looking forward to seeing all the interesting progress out there from something that is already out there currently, like artificial intestines that astronauts will be able to use in order to generate oxygen and perhaps, like water and things like that. So I think even the definition of technology and biotechnology as that is going to change as the technology progresses. And that's, one thing that I'd like to contribute to the definition.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of mimic what Alex said, because in fantasy world, crossbow is technology. So if you're writing a fantasy, then you're dealing with established pieces of hardware for the most part, unless you're making up stuff. When you're writing science fiction, I think it's more of tools and procedures that help you to accomplish a goal without, hard manual labor.
Awesome. So our next question is, what makes technology believable versus unbelievable? Is it the execution? Is it the level of detail? Is it how much is based on real science? Is it how the research process works out?
Honestly, this question, looking at all the questions, I think this one's the hardest to really nail down, because what's believable to one person could be unbelievable to another. For me, the distinction between unbelievable and believable really comes down to, and with my background as a programmer, is seeing how technology we have today, can I put it into whatever this other world is? If it's a futuristic Earth and we're going 300 years in the future, is it believable that this computer right here is now half that size and able to project? Is that believable? For me, yes. Someone else, maybe no. But I think it really comes down to how it's executed, and does it follow a possible trend that would fit for whatever world the story is being written for?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, that not everyone is going to have the exact same level of believability in what they can accept to suspend their disbelief. But I think that sci-fi technology, like with a magic system, it'll be important to define the rules of your world early on in the story and stick to them. And even if they aren't perfectly scientifically sound or based off real world physics, you don't need to have perfect detail, but sometimes just a few well-researched details can go a long way to help readers stay immersed and help them suspend disbelief. Because I think ultimately when you're writing fiction, the goal is going to be immersion, not necessarily that you're writing a perfect vision of whatever speculative world you're coming up with. And I think another thing to keep in mind when it comes to believability is whether or not the technology feels like it's incorporated with the rest of the world. If you have a technological element, but we don't really see anything else in society that is changed or structured based on that speculative element, then that does ruin suspension of disbelief for me as a reader or audience member.
Yeah. After two such interventions, one is like press, and I bleed for Patrick, who's the last after everybody's done this thing. Organicity. I'm going to keep it as a contribution instead of trying to define the whole thing. You can get away with anything as long as you establish the rules that Claire was talking about and follow them. It doesn't matter if you establish them, if you think, oh, I'll get out of them for just a thing to write this chapter. If you do, the whole sorry mess comes teetering down. You have to follow your own rules with more fervor than the reader, because you will have very smart readers who will pick like, oh my God, it's back on luck. He died in chapter 13. What's he doing now? So that kind of thing has to be taken care into the story. And I would say, in order to keep technology organic with its world, study history, read a lot, but mostly think of the effects of any technology in its world and the way it looks once that technology is established, or starting, but established is easier. If you look back at radio, at the print, the printing press was invented like 6 times in history, and only so many times it made headway. So it wasn't believable then for the people who lived there. So the environment is crucial to have the reactions of those humans to whatever we call technology in our stories.
That's actually the biggest point that I wanted to kind of like highlight, that technology is not static. And for me personally, a key point of making a believable technology is making a good interaction with the environment. Even if you have something like, well, if we don't think only about the biotechnology, if we think about any sort of technology, if you take something like, let's say, teleporting in 1 million years and 2 million years is not going to be the same thing, if we bring it back to the technology that we know today. So from the point of working in the biotech industry, like the technology on which I'm working on now is not even close to the one that I worked on 5 years ago. It started, from some point, but it evolves. It really evolves, and it evolves in interaction with people with whom it comes into contact, with different communities that it touches. So every time technology basically sort of like stems into a new environment, the technology itself will change. So for me personally, I'd like to see maybe more of a shift of technology. For instance, if you have, let's say, civilization which goes abroad to different planets, it doesn't keep the same technology all the time, but that the technology itself evolves as the civilization evolves.
So I think it really comes down to execution. And I agree you have to have rules. I don't agree, though, that you have to have them laid out in your book. I think you have to have an internal consistency. The other thing with tech is it's never a win-win. When we got email, who in the heck thought you'd get spam or phishing or any of the other stuff? Alex is like, yeah, another programmer. So, but the thing is, you don't think about those things, right? Email is like, oh my God, this is great. I can instantly communicate with anybody on the planet. And then you start getting people, dropping ransomware into your system, or, they're hacking your bank account, or, any number of other things. So I think the thing is you have to balance out any technology that you've got with somewhat realistic downfalls of the same thing. So, if you're introducing, hyperdrives, there's got to be a offside to, you can't just be like, oh yeah, hyperdrives, everything works perfect. No, there's got to be consequences, because whether they're real or not, it needs to feel fully fleshed out, because nothing in this world or any world is actually ever perfect. So you need to make sure that you show the warts and the bumps and the scars that along the way, so that it feels like it isn't, like, oh, well, you rolled out the new car and it's perfect. And then people go, yeah, that never happens. So I think really it comes down to your execution of your idea, making sure that you have an internal consistency, and that you are looking at whatever you're bringing into the story in a 360 panorama to make sure that you're getting all the aspects of how it would impact a civilization that it's in.
I think those are some great answers. If no one minds, just so that we don't all get stuck in a loop of doing the same people in the same order and people aren't getting a chance to go up front, let's reverse the order for this next question, shall we?
For me?
Cool. What is hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi? And how does this distinction, if any, play into believability in technology?
So hard sci-fi is usually based in science. You usually, when you're writing hard sci-fi, like Asimov, your readers are really looking for that scientific detail. They want to know, they want to see plans. They want, formulas. They want specifics on how this would work. And the people who read that, kind of like MK with biotech, she's going to have a much more deep understanding. So she could actually write something that was completely believable, because she can dig into all the little tiny details. Whereas with soft sci-fi, you get a lot more hand-wavium. Like in my Darkest Storm series, they have superpowers. I never go into how the superpowers occurred or why they occur. It's just the internal consistency of the book is there are people who have superpowers. End of story. You don't need to dig into the genetics of how, which genes are being activated and turned on and off in order to get to the point where you have these superpowers. So I think it really comes down to what your audience's expectation for a book is. Because if you are looking at like a YA science fiction romp and you're dumping in 6 pages of how the hyperdrive works, at best, they'll just skim it. At worst, they'll just throw the book across the room and say, I'm never reading this person again.
Yeah, so I actually answered these questions, I think, on every single Right Hive panel that I've been at. uh, about science, but I'll answer it again. So basically, for me personally, the difference between hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi is in the amount of, sprinkles of science on top. So just the amount of science sprinkles that you put. But I do differentiate, for instance, something that I would call science fantasy from soft sci-fi and hard sci-fi. For me, a true sci-fi is something that has to have a root in real science. It doesn't have to be, completely based on science, but that it stemmed from some sort of scientific idea, an idea which is based in scientific reality, versus the scientific fantasy or futuristic fantasy, which can be basically anything, placed in future or in some sort of science-looking environment. Whereas with the hard sci-fi, it's also very tricky, to put in a lot of detail in there, because at some point you're going to become a bore and no one's going to want to read your book. So again, with hard sci-fi, it is a mistake to try to cram as much science as possible. It is just about getting this, extra level of information kind of to make it more believable, with, rooting it further in the real world and in the real science and in what is already, for instance, published in the latest papers, and then, figuring out something completely new from something that is already published and maybe already in the works, like the thing that I mentioned previously, the intestines that would work for astronauts in the space for producing oxygen and so on. That is for me the real difference. But this definition is very, very flexible. And what someone considers a soft science is going to be hard science for another person. I do not see a real boundary there. It's more like, a sliding bar.
For me is, okay, I'm kind of older school. So what we used to call the hard science, physics, chemistry, biology, while soft sci-fi or science fiction is not about stretches of the imagination in a different direction, so more as based on the soft science, sociology, anthropology, history, political science type thing. So for me, that's the real difference. One type of science versus another type of science. The basic difference from the writer's point of view is that in hard science / fiction, you can experiment. Experiments are doable and they have limited length. While in the social sciences, the subject of any experimentation would be the humans, unless we're unbelievably callous and we set up some farm in Brazil to check out, with 13 children, what's going to happen, say, Lord of the Flies situation. All we have to work with is actual history, is actual, I'll put it differently, the actual behavior of societies and civilizations through time. And there is your consistency, there is your thread that unifies the thing. At the end of the day, what I am writing for, at least, is for humans about problems solved by other humans or not solved by other humans. And that's also very cool to do. But in other words, I'm trying to reach an understanding from mind to mind. And the devices we use to face the world, as Alex was saying, kind of the things that we interpose between ourselves and the rest of reality. Be that, okay, this glass to, oh, it's not in the camera. That thing invisible to, it was censored because it's forbidden drink. So that kind of thing is what makes the weave that we are going to make it believable or not. We're all dealing with humans, but sometimes, as one of us was saying just now, the how is less important than the why, and I'll contribute that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with a lot of what you were bringing up there. I think that there's not a super hard line between hard and soft sci-fi, but I think that it really depends on the focus of the story. And harder sci-fi tends to have plot lines that are constructed more to steer the story toward explanations of the world and how it works. And in that way, the world or the technology itself is more of a focus, whereas in softer sci-fi, you're focusing more on the characters, and the technology is there more to serve the characters. And authors have a little bit more leeway or are taking more liberties in bending the technology and the science itself if it serves the plot.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. There really isn't a line in the sand for what is hard and what is soft sci-fi. It's just like Claire said, it's a sliding scale, and it's going to change for everyone. For like for me with The Wolf and Me, I took a lot of liberties. Every piece of technology that I've got in the book is based off of something that we actually have today, just advanced a couple hundred years, but I don't get into the nitty gritty of how this technology works and everything. The technology more is there to support the characters and to help build the world and build the characters. The technology isn't the focus, whereas usually with a more your hard sci-fi, again, like Claire said, that's going to be more of the focus is this is the warp drive versus we're in a spaceship flying around. Yeah, it's got a warp drive, but we don't really care about 15 pages of the warp drive. We can build the world and we can continue the story with just saying, oh, yes, we've got a warp drive and we can go faster than light. And that's I think that's how you can really get a good distinction of what is something is more hard sci-fi versus soft sci-fi.
If I can just add something to this, kind of make it a little bit more of a discussion than just answering questions. So I think that this also changes with years because, and I'm going to throw in some of the examples here. So, for instance, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein today is considered one of the first works of science fiction, right? Today we would call it like very, very soft, very, very, like full of imagination and so on. But actually at the time, Mary Shelley, was familiar with some of the first discoveries of electricity. And at the time, what they saw is that when they let the electricity through the limbs of animals, that they started getting movement. So it was basically based on hard and pure science, which for that time was something that no one was familiar with. And it was basically pushing people to think about this hard science from the time. Another example is War of the Worlds from H.G. Wells. So it's very controversial today because everyone thinks, oh, it's such stupid ending, because let's face it, it's not a spoiler for anyone because today everyone knows, that it's microbes in the end that kill the aliens. But at the time, H.G. Wells, he actually studied biology, and it was a huge discovery of the time that something like microbes exist. And he was actually the one making this top-notch science, very popular and familiar to a broad masses. So today we consider it soft and we can sometimes even consider it like, funny or stupid. But at the time, it was, kind of like based in hard science, which a lot of people did not know about.
Yeah, and even to add in on that, the entire computer industry, 100 years ago, hard to believe that's actually the 1920s, we were just figuring out how to land on the moon, and a computer fit in the size of essentially your living room, if not bigger. And now every day we walk around, this computer right here has just as much computational power as the lunar lander had at that time. But as technology advances, they never thought something like this could happen. For if we wrote about our cell phones in the 1920s, your high sci-fi, no one's really going to believe it, almost into a fantasy. Whereas nowadays, my niece and nephew still don't believe that I'm older than Google. So yeah, I definitely agree that the definitions are going to change as time advances and all of our technologies advance.
Gee, I'm older than computers. What does that mean?
I just want to give a shout out to the term hand wavium. I think Patrick said that. I'm sure it's probably been heard before, but it's really clever and it's the first I'm hearing of it. So awesome term. So what are some general tips for how you can incorporate technology in a believable fashion into your fiction? I know we've kind of touched on some things like the warp drive and how you can portray that and either put emphasis on it or less emphasis on it. But what are some actual tips for like getting into your own work and basically taking your production engine for your work apart and fixing some of the nuts and bolts?
So I think really what it comes down to for incorporating technology is really what the story needs and what your audience is expecting. So, if you're looking at, the classic hard sci-fi, Asimov, Clark, those guys, they were heavy duty into the physics and engineering, and that's what their readers expect. So, that's what they wanted. If you were writing urban fantasy and you've got 6 pages of diagrams and, formulas on how your magic system works, you're probably not going to get a lot of readers because that's not what they're going to the book for. If you're reading urban fantasy, you want paranormal or you want more action adventure stories. I grew up back when a lot of the science fiction was mostly hard science fiction, and then like Dune and Heinlein started to change that, where you weren't expected to be able to prove your hypothesis to be able to write the book. There became a lot more just understanding of, because, we don't think of, nobody sits and says, oh, well, my cell phone does blah, 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 and, for 6 pages, because you know what a cell phone is. So internal to your story, if your characters know what a cell phone is, then it is you as the writer need to make sure that you're giving them enough information so they understand what the cell phone is without like just beating them over the head with, here's all the tech specs of this phone so that you can understand what it does. It is much more about using your scientific facts as seasoning to your dish, not the main course.
It's a difficult question because there are different types of readers, right? And the truth is you're never going to make your world and your technology 100% believable for every single reader out there. You're not going to be everyone's taste. So the real question is, what sort of world do you want to create? I think this is essential. I don't think that it is necessary to focus on technology to make it believable. I think you can have character-oriented story and still make technology super believable just by, incorporating important facts into their life. I'll give an example. So, for instance, one of the things that I'm writing is a young adult science fiction novel, which is based in the future. And I'm using a lot of the current knowledge or like some of the things which I know are possible in some sorts of animals. And I'm applying this for humans in future because a lot of the times when we're developing technology, we're basing it in nature and we're trying to replicate what we see in nature to the futuristic technology. So this is just a natural way of human thinking. So, look at the things, for instance, in nature, which are not used yet, and then try to imagine how this would be used in the future. Try to imagine, what problems do we have today and what are the possible solutions, that future could bring to solve these problems. And this is actually the way you make your technology believable, because if there is no problem, then you don't need a technology to solve it. The technology from the point of someone who works in a biotech, you can make a really super cool thing, but if no one needs it, it's going to be a failure. You're not going to sell it to anyone. You're not going to develop it. You're not going to push it far enough. Because the truth is, for developing any sort of technology, you need years of research. You need a lot of money. You need a lot of effort. You need a lot of people working, really a long time to develop it. So if there is no problem, if there is no interest in the world, then you're not going to have technology. So basically, you need to have a problem and you need to have a technology to fix it. And if these two are intertwined, just do your research to be sure to, at least base it on some science if you want to make it really scientific. And then you can play with characters, you can have character-oriented story, but still have this intertwined with the technology through the problem that needs to be solved.
I'm lucky. I'm in the middle. So whichever way we start, I have been already, shown the right way of doing things. So no, I want to contribute from the side of procedure, tricks, being totally with Patrick in that you have to offer the audience what they're expecting, or suitable surprises too, which they would like, not hate. I use the following thing. Okay, first dictum, for what it's worth, is I make very rigid systems for my stories, but I never write about them. They're for me. They're for me, so I don't go out of bounds. And suddenly, like for instance, the Road of Xibalba started at some point. We needed something to move, to teleport things. And lo and behold, there comes the Ansible to the rescue. Okay, but once you have the Ansible, you have to figure out who uses it, how often do they use it, and what's the social impact of this thing, because that's the world you're going to face. So no good intention goes without consequences. So I look at three areas mostly. One is customs, things which are habitual, like drinking coffee, like calling on the phone, this type of thing. In one of my first Road to Xibalba things, phones were just becoming, the iPhone was just coming out. And I imagine paying with your phone, paying the gas bill with your phone in your car. And I mean, it didn't take a lot of stretch of the imagination to figure that one out. It's what Marina was saying. Or Alex, it's just simple extrapolation. The second area is what is mainstream, what everybody believes. If in the Road of Xibalba, as an example, there is Gateway, kind of an island continent that floats in the magnetic field of Earth and goes willy-nilly with the winds. What effect will have this in politics? That is a biocentral thing. So what kind of new biological species are populating commercially the planet because these people are up there? So that's what I mean by mainstream. And then popular, which is popular usage. What has filtered down to normal, like the implants in the cyberpunk sagas, the implants, the body implants. You don't have to explain them because they're there. So that is my third say. So to synthesize customs, what is mainstream and what has filtered to popular.
Yeah, we've had some really great commentary about, I definitely agree that the social aspects are really, really important, because if we have this technology, whatever technology you're developing for your sci-fi world is not going to completely exist in a vacuum. It's going to have, it will have been developed for a reason. There will be people attempting to commercialize it. There will be laws surrounding its use. There will be different social attitudes toward it. There will be slang that pops up around it. And all of this is really, it's really important on every level to consider just how the technology you're using is intertwined with the fabric of your entire world. And it's not just one technology that's going to develop by itself in a vacuum. There are other technologies that will develop alongside it and which will branch off of its development as well. And that's especially important to consider if you're writing historical sci-fi or historical fantasy or even fantasy worlds. If you're writing civilizations or worlds based on the past, it's important to consider what technologies coexisted at the same time and why these technologies existed. So at any level, a little bit of research can go a long way, even if you don't develop every single one of them very deeply, even if you don't explain the exact physics behind what's developing and why. you need to think about how like the invention of gunpowder is going to impact every other aspect of your fantasy world. Or do you have a world that has working plumbing and no gunpowder? And if so, why? What are the factors? Like, what are the resources that exist in your world? How is technology funded? Who is creating the technology to solve what problems? So it's really important to think about your world at just every level, like sociology, technology, politics, religion, even too. That's all going to combine to make your world and your technology believable. But to get the specifics of your technology right, if you're writing sci-fi and fantasy, you probably have a good number of nerdy friends. So ask them questions because they are an amazing resource. People love to talk about their fields. In my experience, I have friends who have been electrical engineers, computer scientists, even a neuroscientist friend. And they're like, hey, I have this scene that I'm working on in my book, and here's a piece of technology that I want to use. How can I make this work? And so I got like a hour-long conversation with a friend about like how to use EMPs and how can I make this happen in the scenario I want to make it happen. And it's a lot of fun. So use people you know, use them as a resource, because what they can do for you in your story is probably going to be more than what you can get doing research on your own.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. Research. Talk with friends. Again, one of the most favorite things that an individual person has to talk about is themselves. So if you've got a friend who's in the military and you have military questions, ask. I mean, I've got a military sci-fi. I've got 5 or 6 friends across different branches of the military. So I'm like, hey, theoretically, if such and such happened, what kind of things would we do for the military or for the Air Force? And then just getting general ideas. That's a really great way right there. And like everyone else said, really look at how the technology is going to impact society. A lot of our earlier innovations with technology were actually driven more by a military need than for a general making it easier for society. And then it slowly integrates itself into making it for society. So really look at how all of the technology is going to intertwine and develop it from there. And probably bouncing a little bit into the next question a little bit, but do your research, because there's a lot of stuff out there where it's like, oh yeah, I've created this technology. And then when you get someone like myself, I'm also in the medical field. So when I see someone going, oh yeah, we're shocking asystole, and I'm going, no, you're not. Research.
I'll add that it's actually pretty horrible to read something that is inaccurate. It's like you feel your shame projects or the other person's shame you receive. It's horrible. What happens is sometimes you have to stop reading that thing because, research, you just owe it to the people who are going to plunk down money for your yarn. You owe it that the thing be consistent and together. As I've said somewhere, you can come up with, like, perfectly, Alex thing, a wolf man in the military and cross with science fiction. I mean, you're going to love that thing. But if the execution works, he's in what? Your third novel now, 5th, something like that. So that is the thing, consistency in the worldview that you are using. I think you can even wing the rest. Like even some scientific data, you don't have to talk about it. And if you don't know, it's very difficult. It's high-end math. Leave it there.
I'm just going to maybe add one more thing to that. And that is, it's not always possible, but sometimes and in some fields, it is possible to get some personal experience by volunteering. And for instance, like medical field could be one of those, So if you really want to give something extra, this, personal experience or how you interact with it is going to be really valuable. And it is possible in some cases to get it through volunteering.
Getting old also helps because then you've been everything from short order cook all the way to light bulb repairman. And, that adds to what you can do.
Okay, cool. So we've kind of touched on some of the next questions already. And if it's okay with everyone, let's switch back to regular alphabetical order just to mix it up. What's one good example of believable technology in fiction, and how does it work with the story that's being told?
One good believable technology. We're gonna switch off of books a little bit, and I'm gonna go with Star Trek and go back to the example of their warp drive. There's actually real science behind it. Theoretically, that warp drive should work if you have a society capable of actually building it and providing all of the components that are needed to make it run. It's theoretically believable. And again, the warp drive, it's not the main focus of the story, but just like any other technology, it has issues. It goes down. The enemy ships are targeting it specifically, trying to take it out because that will cripple, or if not just outright destroy a ship. That building in that technology of it's here, but it's not always a main focus until it needs to be that main focus, makes it, in my opinion, a really, really good piece of technology.
An example I really enjoy is Altered Carbon. Pretty early.
Mine.
Wait, what?
You stole mine.
Oh no.
Let's go ahead.
Well, I'm sure we'll have different things to talk about. I really like how it early on it shows you how the sleeves and the stacks work. The sleeve is human body and the stack is essentially the uploaded consciousness. And this is a basis for people receiving new bodies and the upper classes basically being given digital immortality. And you see early on not just how the system works, and you're not just given the rules, but you see how it impacts the rest of society. In an early episode, you see a woman comforting an old woman, and it's clarified that the older woman is actually her young daughter, and they have this young woman in an older woman's body because that's what was available. And they also have laws against certain aspects like double stacking, which is when people upload their consciousness in multiple places. And by establishing these rules, it sets up viewers and readers for interesting twists later on as far as body swapping and the possibilities. So we're not completely blindsided when something like this happens. We think, oh no, why didn't I see that coming? So it's very good foreshadowing that makes the entire world feel believable. It incorporates ways that technology exacerbates class conflicts and the haves and the have-nots, and how our society today might look this far in the future if this kind of technology were readily available.
I also would think of like books, and we know many which are fantastically well suited. But I was going to suggest The Wind Up Girl by Paolo Bacigalupi, which is one of those things which is completely from page one. It's all about mechanics and engineering and stuff of which we are told in an enjoyable way. We don't go 6 pages into the theory of the thing. That's for the writer to know. But he takes us through a world where hardship comes in new ways. Like your rotator is worn out and you don't have the credits to replace it. And I mean, basically, he creates a world of new technology which impact negatively and positively different people, and we follow these people, and we feel it. And that for me is when you're reading a good book, when you feel the thing as if it was you, and you get angry and you get despaired, but it's a book. It's like part of your life, especially if you read several hours a day or at least one. And the end of this book, and I chose it for this reason, is that the person we have been following as amplified person made of spare parts and so forth doesn't do anything extraordinary the most of the book until she's fed up with life and she bursts and does something extraordinary. And it's based on technology, is in this case based on engineering technology and mechanics. And it works beautifully to crash the wave that the author has been building. If anyone wants to have a good ride, read that thing. And it's also a lesson on how to restrain, how fantastic biotechnology and engineering, and keep them restrained and paint a world of lack of resources and poverty where these marvels are possible and make them coexist and mix. It's when you get green of envy and all that stuff, good stuff. Then you write more.
Yeah, so I'm going to mention 2 examples, and actually they have something in common. One of them is Philip P. Peterson. It's a transport series, and I first started reading it, I think it was now 5 or 6 years ago. I think it was not even translated to English then yet. I read it in German, and German is my 3rd language, so it was a hardship to read it, and still it was so damn interesting, you know, that I was like pushing through reading it in German just to get this story finished. It's amazing in a sense of you know, this technology, the world, but it has multiple aspects of technology. You know, it's not just looking at this development of travel onto distant worlds and so on. Then, you know, when he takes the series further, he looks into how some aspects of it are going to affect the society and how this society is going to develop depending on, for instance, on which planet they landed and how this planet has been, you know, has evolved. One of the reasons why I believe it is such a good story is because he's actually been involved in some engineering work himself. So he's worked at NASA, for instance, for some time. And I think it is very valuable to have some sort of this personal experience. And that's why I also mentioned volunteering beforehand as a very valuable way to at least get some sort of insight. Another good example for me personally is Kim Stanley Robinson, the Red Mars series.
Mm-hmm.
And for him, it is not he who actually has experience in chemistry. I think it's his wife that is the chemist. So I'm sure that, you know, they were talking a lot throughout the development of this series. And again, it is, you know, this research very well done and this background very well done that makes this whole world believable through integration of this good research and then the socio-economic impacts on the society that it evolves together with the technology.
Since Claire stole mine, I'm just kidding, which is a great, Altered Carbon is a great example. I'm going to go with Hyperion by Dan Simmons. Hyperion is basically the Canterbury Tales in space. And he does a fantastic job, not only intertwining portal technology, space flight, all this stuff, but he also gets into the cruciform and the Shrike and the religious impacts of technology, and then, you know, AI being incorporated into the gate technology, and they are fantastic. And so, but it really is interesting because it starts off with there's 7 people on a spaceship and they don't have anything in common. So they each tell their story of how they got there, which introduces you to the world, but also starts setting up all these situations where, well, the priest is thinking it's this and the military guy is thinking it's this. And they're starting to butt heads because, you know, the religious guy is saying, oh, well, we are going to Hyperion because of the Shrike. And the military guys go like, yeah, because we're going to get the Shrike and turn it into a weapon, you know, and it's the time tombs. It is fantastic. And all of it is so effortlessly explained, but there is no technology details in it at all. It's like, it's just all taken for granted. It's laid out like that. And, you know, the jargon's there, but you get enough explanation to understand what's going on. But it's all the socioeconomic, religious, political impacts of this technology that is basically the entire book. And it's 4 books now, but I just think he does a fantastic job with laying that out. It's a must read in my world.
Can I add one more author? Because I feel that we've underrepresented the female authors, and there are some brilliant ones with some brilliant technologies. And I'm going to single out one of my favorite female sci-fi authors, Octavia Butler. She does an amazing job, with integrating both technology and the society. So that is a big recommendation.
Yeah, I would add Mary Robinette Cole with the Lady Astronaut series. What happens after a meteor hits Earth and devastates the United States East Coast and sets off the greenhouse effect in 1950s America.
Just to be a best, I would nominate Pat Cadigan, Sinners. It's music, which is very seldom used as the thread in really like building a world that, from the inside of the stage looking out instead of reverse where most of us are. So yeah, I don't see any kind of primacy in sex. I think that both or all five have fantastic exponents in writing.
Alex, Claire, did you have anyone else you wanted to add?
Actually, yeah. So Holly Ash in the Cleansing Rain duology, I'm actually one of her critique partners for that series. She did a great job of building the virus and really making it believable, as well as folding it into this entire cult society story. It made it so believable where it's like, when it came out, I'm like, Holly, maybe it's not the best time to bring it out because it was right during COVID, and it just instantly fit in. She made the technology so believable that I'm like, it could be happening today and I would not be surprised.
I just wanted to add about Holly, because I know Holly, I've been one of her first CPs on the Journey Mission series. And that's another series from her, which is also has an amazing, technology building and world building. So just wanted to add to that one.
I think Becky Chambers does a great job of adding a really human element to sci-fi. And even if the technological elements aren't super deep, everything feels believable because it's the exploration of how it impacts the characters. That's the focus of the stories. So if you guys have read the Monk and Robot stories, I always forget the name of the first one, The Psalm for the Wild Built. It is a really fascinating explanation of it's an exploration of humans and artificial intelligence, but in a cozy sci-fi setting. And it really digs into the question of what does it mean to be human and what does it mean to be alive in a way that I've never seen a humans versus robots story done. So I would really recommend digging into that one.
Awesome. Let's rock and roll. Are there any examples of a good idea for a sci-fi technology that had a less than satisfactory execution? I almost said education. And how would you fix it?
I really struggled with this one because usually if I can't get into it, I just put the book down. But I'll go one of my favorite series from Orson Scott Card, the Ender series and Ender Shadow series. I loved pretty much everything that he put in there. The one issue that I had with the book series was the faster than light communication. It just felt so disjointed from everything else that he had put into the stories, and honestly, I don't know how I would fix it. It pulled me out of the immersion was the issue that I had with it.
I don't have a specific example in mind, but I think that when a piece of media is like ostensibly science fiction or ostensibly grounded in reality, and it's teasing a big twist or a big explanation coming up, and then it goes into the hand-wavium territory, and it's like, oh, it's magic, and it pulls it out of nowhere, that really can ruin the believability for me because it feels like a cop-out from the writer. And I really like blends of magic and technology. I love it when they combine together. I love weird supernatural stuff happening, but I don't like it when it's just used to fill in a plot hole. That really kills the immersion for me.
We'll go with that. And I mean, who wouldn't? The thing has to make sense in the world that you're living in. But I would say that we have to remember that technology and society, for that matter, is a continuum. So we cannot subtract or just plug in no parts without affecting the whole enchilada, right? That's when technology fails in writing or in other forms of communication. When we don't make it part of the same organic animal, you have something that looks like a cow but behaves like a cat and climbs walls. And people in their experience are offended by inconsistencies. This is science fiction and fantasy and all this good stuff. So what we have to do is be at least consistent and believable so the yarn can unwind in the most elegant fashion.
Yeah, I will not pick out any specific examples because even, in the books where I did see such examples, I still love the book, so I don't want to pick it for it. I will say, however, I've noticed it even in fantasy books, not necessarily science fiction, and there's a general this category within which people kind of fall into trap of making a big mistake is when they set a hard rule, like this is something that can never, ever, ever in a million years be broken, whether it's science, whether it's magic or whatever, and then they break it on page 651, 156, and 259. Then my brain is screaming the entire time, why did you then tell me 5, 6, or 7 times that this can never be done if you've done it 7 times throughout the book? Why? And that's the only comment that I'm going to give here.
Mine is very specific. It's in The Last Jedi when Vice Admiral Holdo uses the ship as a giant missile and slams into the Star Destroyer to kill it after 8 movies of that you cannot, if you're in hyperspace, you are not in the physical plane anymore. And I'm like, so basically that was a cheap and easy way to get rid of a Star Destroyer but it shattered 8 whole movies worth of, you can only use hyperdrive to get from point A to point B, and you just don't want to go through a star because it'll destroy you.
Excellent. So flowing from that, we've got a ton of good information here, and we've done a fantastic job. I'd like to say you've all done great. But let's condense everything we've thought of today down to one final thought that each of you would like to impart to that author who's working on figuring all of this out. Maybe it's their first book that they're trying to figure out. Maybe it's a new genre for them. And we're trying to make that a thing that they can take away from this and go, these last points will help me build this book that I'm dreaming of building.
I'll start. So mine is, the old adage is write what you know, but that really isn't correct. It's learn what you want to write. And so I have a steampunk series. The main character is a blacksmith. I actually went and took blacksmithing classes so that I knew how to, so I knew not only how it worked, but the smell, the feel, how many times I got burned, those type things. So I think when you're doing this, it isn't about you have to know it all. It's you have to learn as you're going to produce a better quality product.
That's almost the exact advice I was going to give. I would say if you're thinking about writing fiction with technology in it, science fiction, and are intimidated to start just because you don't have a personal science profession in your background, don't be intimidated, because it is really about what you are interested in and what you're willing to learn and research, and not about things that you've been paid to do in the past. And I think that's what a lot of people get caught up on. It's oh no, I need to know everything about technology. I need to have the college courses under my belt. It's no, you have research, and 2, you also can write soft science fiction. If you're interested in the human elements of science fiction, that is absolutely a valid choice for what you want to write.
Society is a continuum. It's not discrete parts. There's no divisions. So you don't have to write about the whole thing. You can choose any portion of it and write about that. Technology will be presented at any scale, from the corner drugstore all the way to the mega multinational corporation. So don't worry. Try to get to write what you're comfortable with. Comfortable. Again, you don't have to know. You can research, but write at the level of complexity you feel that speaks to you, and don't worry about the rest. There will be always people writing larger escapes and smaller escapes than you with incredible flavor. So do your own thing. That's what's going to work.
And definitely don't be afraid to experiment. That's how a lot of technology comes out, is people going, what if? So don't be afraid, experiment, play around with it, do research, like Patrick said, go take some classes, Google, talk to your friends. There's a world of information out there. You don't have to be an expert to be able to write about it. Just learn a little bit, just learn just enough that you need, and don't be afraid to experiment.
Yeah, I'm going to summarize it into a couple of terms. So first one is obviously that everyone mentioned research. Second one is experience. If you cannot experience the whole thing, there is one small fraction of what you're writing about that you can experience. And then you can infuse this sort of experience and this sort of emotion even in this small fragment, and it's going to make it more believable. Integrate. Why integrate? Integrate society, integrate character, integrate technology. All of these things are interconnected, and you cannot have one, separate from the other. You need to think holistically. And then the last thing is get feedback and revise. There is nothing without that. So proper feedback and then revise as many times as needed.
Well, you mean writing is rewriting?
Yes.
Surprise.
Revision, everyone's favorite thing. So if I can throw one tip out as well, one of the central themes that I saw on everyone's commentary, I don't know if you can tell how many notes I've taken, is that the technology is important, but it becomes believable when it's in a character's hand, in their mind, in their life. So if you're sitting there trying to figure out, like, well, where do I get started with this new idea I have for this radical new hyperdrive? Because we've talked a lot about hyperdrives. The answer is you start with how it's going to affect the character in the first place, and you rock and roll from there. Yeah. All right. I would like to thank everyone for being here. One last time, just let everyone know where they can find you. If you got a website, if you got a social media, anything like that.
All right. Well, again, I'm Alex Smith. Best places to find me at least for my writing, is I'm on Instagram as Alex Smith Writer with 2 T's. The reason it's misspelled is because behind every great author is an amazing editor who catches those mistakes. Also, I'm on Twitter a little bit. I'm not really active there, but it's Alex Smith 1988-11. And if you want to check out my website, which is basically all wildlife photography, it's midnightwolf.photography. And then you could find The Wolf in Me Survive on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, both in ebook and paperback.
I am on Twitter as atomic_pixie because I had it since before I was doing the writer thing. I'm on Instagram and TikTok as Claire Winn Author, and my promo is getting slightly more unhinged because it's a release month for me. Yeah, I think those are the main places you can find me. I do have a website, it's clairewinn.com.
I'm trusting the reading capability of everyone there.
And just in case someone is listening to this on podcast form, do you want to say where they're at?
Yes, email joaquin.kino.gil@gmail.com. In LinkedIn or in IMDb, Joaquin Kino Gil, there's a ton of Joaquin Gils apparently. And my phone, 310-614-8068. Even though I'm in Boston, I answer to a LA phone. Go figure.
So you can find me on Instagram and on Twitter. On Instagram, I publish some of my 100-word short microfiction stories. It's m.k.marteens with 2 E's. Wait, like here. On Twitter, it's m_k_marteens with 2 E's. Because one of them was not accepting dots, so I had to change it. Otherwise, it would be the same.
And I am Patrick Dugan. You can find me if you go to Linktree/Patrick Dugan. That has all my social media, where all my books are, my newsletter sign up, my website. So it's a one-stop shop. It's Linktree/Patrick Dugan.
All righty. And for what it's worth, I'm at J Pullman Writing on pretty much anything that you might check out. My website is jpullmanwriting.com. And I would like to thank everyone one more time for this amazing panel. I hope that everyone who watched takes a minute and just acknowledges the amount of work that goes into one of these. I would like to thank you all so much for watching this panel, because Right Hive is a lot of information to collect in a brief amount of time. And the good news is you can always rewatch the video if you missed something that you want to go back to. There are plenty of other events coming up at Right Hive. I encourage you to check them out. And at this point, if you have any questions that you haven't already asked in the Discord chat, please feel free to do so, and we will try to get to them as effectively as possible. Thank you all so much. Have a fantastic day.